Hello, and welcome to today's Eckerson Group webinar, which is all about change, how to ensure adoption of whatever you deploy through organizational change management. I'm Jay Piscineri, Senior Consultant with the Eckerson Group. Presenting today is Wayne Eckerson, President of the Eckerson Group, noted author and speaker and sought-after consultant. So about Eckerson Group. We're a boutique consulting firm. We work with commercial organizations, nonprofit organizations, both large and small, to help them get more value out of their data. We specialize in delivering data strategies, plans, and roadmaps that are actionable. And that's where we find the need amongst many of our clients is in the planning and strategy stage so that they know what to implement for the future. So with that, I'll hand it over to Wayne.
All right, Jay, thank you very much. I'm glad you didn't forget about Eckerson Group.
Yeah.
Also, we want to emphasize that we would like to make this webinar conversational. So if you do have comments or questions, put them into the chat. And Jay's going to be monitoring that. And we're going to stop periodically and we'll take your questions and we'll bring in your comments because we do think this is a kind of a community and we like to have a conversation with you. So change management, big topic, something that we confront all the time with our clients. And I would have to say, managing change is the key to your success. I mean, you can have the most elegant architecture, the most powerful tools, the best people and operating model. But if you haven't planned for change, then it's all for naught. You're not going to get anywhere. So, and we've seen this happen quite a bit. You are taking a huge chance if you don't plan to manage your change, just as this image says here, right? And what we do find is that it's always the last thing people think about. Oh, we're about to deploy. We better implement some kind of a communications plan. It's almost too late at that point. Not quite. But if you're doing that, it's better than nothing. But a lot of organizations and leaders and data teams don't do anything. So anyway, that's the bottom line. But let's talk a little about when you do need to manage change. Two major categories of change. One's organizational, the other is technical. Organizational change usually is things that happen to us in the data space, data and analytics space. And we have to react to it and manage the change and the impact to our teams. The technical changes are things that we do to the rest of the organization, and we impose change on them. And that's a lot of where our focus will be today, is how do we manage change that we're imposing on other folks. But organizationally, we should cover those. Typically, there's a lot of change management that needs to happen after a merger and acquisition or a corporate spinoff. In fact, one of our clients right now is a Fortune 500 company that's a spinoff of a Fortune 100 company. And then it just merged with a company of equal size. So it's both a spinoff and an M&A. And you can imagine the internal churn in terms of roles and systems and who's managing what. And so we're trying to help them figure things out in that environment. A lot has to do with roles and a lot has to do with master data and consolidation of systems. But other changes that happen from the outside are market changes, like a new regulation. In fact, if you remember Sarbanes-Oxley, that regulation after the first financial crisis really spawned the whole data governance field. A new competitor can also spawn big changes that need to be managed. A leadership change, a new CEO, a new COO, a new chief data officer, and they usually bring in a new strategy and new people, and that all imposes change that we have to manage with our teams. Probably the more interesting area are the technical changes, and we're doing this to our organizations all the time, right? We're creating new data solutions like a dashboard, a prediction app, an AI model, and we expect the organization to adopt it because they evidently want it. and we're always surprised when they don't, right? We've seen this time and again with new data or analytics tools, like a data catalog. That particular technology has had a kind of rough and bumpy history of adoption. New data platforms, especially the whole movement from on-premises to the cloud, that's been a huge change environment. And the big issue there is, well, how do you maintain your old environment and keep the lights on while you're building out the new? And then how do you get people to switch from the old to the new? That requires quite a two-step. New data processes. This is a big one. We do a lot of consulting on data governance, and that requires people having new roles, learning new processes, and implementing those processes. Of course, we saw this in the whole adoption of agile and now data ops. These are all new approaches, new techniques for doing things we've done a long time, and therefore require a lot of change management, or else nothing changes, right? Also, people get put into new roles, or some of these new processes like data governance spawns new roles that oftentimes are in addition to what people are already doing, like data owners or stewards. So how do we make sure that they actually know what they're doing and they do what they're supposed to do, even though other things on their calendar kind of crowd out this new responsibility? So those are all things that cause change, and you may have other examples, and we'd love to hear those. Now, why is change hard? I think we've all heard this. We've all experienced this in our personal lives. This is January of a new year. Everyone usually has resolutions that last for about a month or two, right? But we always see it in the business environment, right? So there's a couple of things that make change hard. One is uncertainty. Humans really don't deal well with uncertainty about the future. We get very anxious and we resist any changes to our current reality. We really want the future to be predictable and routine. Change is also hard because we fear that we might lose things like our status, our reputation, even our job. We worry that the skills we've worked long and hard to develop will no longer be deemed useful or valuable. Inertia is a big one, right? Change is hard because as humans, our default mode is not to expend energy if we don't have to. But learning new tools, new tasks, new processes, new roles takes a lot of energy and a lot of time, both which are precious resources for us. And if we don't have to expend that energy, we won't. Habits also, similarly, they're hard to change, as we all know, because it requires us to change things which we do almost without thinking. Changing habits takes a lot of mental and physical energy. And as we just said, we're reluctant to expend any additional energy because we really practice the law of conservation of energy as humans, because without energy, we don't exist, right? And then finally, we've probably all seen this. We maybe did this ourselves when the boss or the executives or the board rolls out a new initiative, a new strategy. We kind of roll our eyes and say, oh, we've seen this show before. Let's just wait this one out. And before long, things will get back to normal, quote unquote normal, right? So things don't change usually because of what we've been talking about, right? These basic attributes of human nature and organizational behavior. I think we probably all understand the downsides of not managing change. We've probably lived through these. And let me just give you a few examples. I did mention data catalogs have had a rough history of adoption, where only a few technical people really adopt the catalog. And of course, what's the downside of that? Well, the company just spent over $100,000 on this new tool and a lot of time to select it. A lot of training went into using it. And if people aren't really using it enterprise-wide, what was the purpose, right? We've seen this with new BI tools. The company standardizes on a tool or brings in a new tool, and people who are already using another tool, they're not going to make the change if they don't have to. And oftentimes the organization's reluctant to make them. So then what happens? Tool and support costs go up because now you're maintaining more than one tool. Or in most cases for BI, it's like 4 or 5 tools. We see this with data governance. As I mentioned earlier, data owners and data stewards oftentimes are volunteered for these roles, and they're not full-time roles with new hires. They're added on to what people are already doing. As a result, they may not do what they're supposed to do, and our data quality issues and our data silos persist. So obviously, there's a lot at stake here, and managing change is, as I said at the outset, is going to be critical to avoiding these pitfalls. So I'm going to stop there for a second. See if Jay and any of you in the audience have a comment or a question.
Yeah, if any of you out there have a comment or a question, please put it in the chat. But I would say, I think, the observation that when you don't manage change and you implement something new, a new system that doesn't get adopted, you've now made your environment more complicated by virtue of the fact that you have the new system and the legacy systems that people are holding on to. I know we're going to get into this later on in the presentation, but it's important to understand what drives people to hold on to what they've gotten, and the slide we looked at earlier of why do people resist change. In my experience, fear of various things is often what is behind the resistance. So one of the challenges is, and here's my question for you, Wayne, is discerning what is the root cause of the resistance. It can be challenging, and I wonder if you have any examples of how you unraveled, what might look like a resistance coming from one thing, and then found underneath the surface that it was really driven by another concern that wasn't on the surface.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the resistance is deep-seated psychologically, as we just talked about.
Yeah.
Some of it might be that, hey, this new thing that you want to do is not relevant to me. It's not going to help me achieve my metrics and goals.
Mm-hmm.
So you really have to understand both the psychology and what's motivating the person professionally and from a business perspective. What are they being held accountable for?
Yeah.
And that's kind of bread and butter. Probably should have emphasized that more in this presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I will talk about a case study that was from my book, Secrets of Analytical Leaders, at the end here. A great case study on change management where they did it beautifully. So we can get to that. Okay, so I've had this little mantra for a while, so these are concepts you can apply to avoid some of those pitfalls that we just talked about and address those fear, uncertainty, and doubt that I talked about, kind of the psychological issues that may prevent adoption of a new tool or policy or program. So it's appeal to the head, to the heart, and the herd. It's kind of catchy, right? So these are principles that I think you can apply. And let me just go through each of these one by one pretty quickly here. So appeal to the head, obviously, is kind of oftentimes where change management programs start and end, right? This is the obvious stuff. We want to educate people. What is changing and why is it changing? How's it going to affect them? And most importantly, what do they need to do? When do they need to do it? And how do they need to do it? And, the point here is that the more information we give them, the more their fears are going to be assuaged, right? And, more and open and frequent communication, the better. So, communicate with people via email, have frequent meetings, open Q&A sessions, town hall meetings, for instance, where people can air their questions or grievances as it may be. So, and I definitely ascribe to this, the more information, the better, but it's not the only thing. If this is all you do, I'm not sure it's going to work, right? So you also have to appeal to the heart. And this is really where you're trying to create an emotional connection with the person. You can appeal to people's emotions. It's a much better reason for them to change, much easier for them to change. So how do we do that? Well, we can inspire people with a mission or cause that's bigger than themselves, that resonates deeply with them. And this could be any number of things. How can we improve the company by doing this? Or maybe we can change the whole industry if we move down this route. or even, we can change the world if we're really idealistic here. So having a mission or cause that's bigger than individuals is very powerful. Also providing the promise of recognition and actually following through on that if things succeed is very powerful. And the point is here is to find some way to connect emotionally with people, not just, with their reason in their head. And because we're more than just logical reasoning beings, we are probably more so than anything emotional beings. So let's try to create an emotional connection for this change. The third and the most powerful is the appeal to the herd. We are herding animals by nature. We tend to do the things that the people around us do. So, that's why most people in the South speak with a Southern twang, why most people in Chicago speak with a Midwest twang, right? There's a great research study that I wrote about in my book because one of the people I profiled used it as part of their change management plan to get analysts to use big data. This was a while ago, to do new types of analysis and generate new insights. And the research tried to figure out how do you get kids who don't like to eat peas to eat their peas? And, they had a number of hypotheses like, well, does coercion work? Well, that turned out to be not true. Does bribery work? Well, maybe for a little bit, but not really. Does persuasion work? Well, that didn't really work either. So they were throwing up their hands until they found something that did work. And that was if they put kids who didn't like to eat peas with kids who did, the kids who didn't eat their peas started to eat their peas, right? Because they're following the herd, right? So we can apply this same principle to data and analytics, right? So what we should do is find or even cultivate people or teams that have implemented the change we want or are eager to embrace that change, right? And then when they implement that change and it's a positive change, we can amplify their behavior and results through various communications channels and media like webinars, like newsletters, meetings, company bulletins and memos, things like that. So we want to amplify the behavior of the minority who have actually made this change and start to create this herd, right? And the more people see that there's a herd embracing this change, the more likely they are to embrace the same behavior as the herd. Now, there are some situations where you have to create the herd yourself, and that might mean hiring in new people to kind of seed the change you want to see happen. So we've seen that happen as well. If that's a possibility that you can hire new people, sometimes that's an easy way out. So those are the three concepts: appeal to the head, give people all the rationale and the logistics they need to make this change; appeal to the heart, connect emotionally with them through a cause larger than themselves with a promise or delivery of recognition; and then finally, appeal to the herd, create this herd momentum towards the thing that you're trying to get people to do.
Yeah, I think it'd be great if we have some examples from our audience about where they've used these concepts of appealing to the head, the heart, and the herd. So we encourage you to chime in the chat. But I would, from my own experience, being a left-brained engineer type, my default way of convincing people is to go to the head, right? Is to talk in terms of evidence and logic and outcomes. And that does not work by itself. It's really important to connect with people emotionally. And I would say there's a tight connection between appealing to the head and appealing to the herd. I'm sorry, appealing to the heart and appealing to the herd. Those are both sort of in the emotional space. But finding the thing that is going to emotionally motivate people is critical. And that can be challenging to figure out what that's going to be. In a given situation, what is going to motivate people emotionally, but it's kind of a critical step.
You know, Jay, I
And
remember
yeah.
an example from something I've read actually,
Mhm.
and I can't remember the exact scenario, but it was a shoe wear company, and one executive was trying to get the organization to move into the recycling some of their material, and to convince them of the problem, he brought in like a bucket load of old worn out shoes and dumped it on the middle of a boardroom table.
Yeah.
And that did make a visceral emotional connection with the executives, and this guy got change that he wanted and
Yeah.
approval to make some changes. So it's that kind of thing that can really help on the appealing to the heart side of this.
Yeah, so we have a couple of comments in the chat here about experiences. So here's one. They had a team of data warehouse engineers who didn't want to move to the cloud a few years ago. They did exactly this and they were able to turn things around and make the transition very successfully. These principles do work. And Christian says, I encourage every leader to adopt them.
Right.
Yeah, the idea of the head, the heart, and the herd. Another comment is it has deep meaning if you look at it in the right way. Another one here is our primary performance measure with prior new solution was adoption, and this helped create awareness for trending over time. Yeah, I think that is key. I've used that same measure of success for some of the projects that I've been involved in. And if you're doing the change management right, the measure, the outcome that you're looking for is adoption, and you can tell how well you're doing by that measure. Yeah, these are really critical concepts, and I think the other thing is that when we're talking about coming at this from a technical change, it's important, even though it's not natural necessarily for technical people to think this way. It's great if you can adopt an awareness about these things when you're dealing with stakeholders, for example, and try to understand, have some empathy, put yourself in their shoes about what the change you're proposing is going to do, to their operational practices, to their position in the company, et cetera. It helps smooth the way for adoption.
Yeah, I recall one example from a client of ours, a VP of business intelligence at a large chemical company, and he kind of ran the BI team like a business, and he saw those. They built a lot of dashboards, and every day he checked the dashboard on dashboard adoption, right? And he said, "This is our sales chart, right? This is our," and adoption was how well they've sold their asset, right? How well they've sold the product that they've been charged with delivering to the organization. And he was very innovative because he also bought a CRM tool for his team, and they use that to track their personal interactions with everybody in their constituency, all the customers that they were supporting in the various departments, to make sure that they reached out on a consistent basis with each of the people and the stakeholders in those groups, establish that emotional connection, and also were notified very quickly if there were some issues that people were having with the reports or the tools that they had delivered to them. So that's one example. Should we move on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So now we want to talk about tactics. So we just covered the concepts. So how do you actually roll this out? Well, I think there's kind of two avenues for doing this. One is before you get approval to make the change, and that's when you really have to convince your superiors, your executives, your managers, your sponsors to adopt this and fund it, right? But part of that is selling. And if you make a successful case for change, you're 50% of the way towards that adoption that you're looking for at the enterprise level. Because if you can convince the executives, well, a lot of the staff will come along as well. So under there, we want to create a communications plan and then get executive buy-in. We then also use that plan not only to kind of sell to the executives, but also to sell to the rank and file in this second phase here, where we roll out the change. And if we're successful, we have to be ready to scale beyond what we even imagine, right? Because if you apply these principles and some other things I'm about to present, uh, things might just tip very quickly towards full adoption. Hard to believe, right? Because oftentimes we're sitting there with shelfware, right? But I think if you apply these principles properly, things might explode beyond what you're expecting. So you've got to be ready to scale. So let's dive into this here. So the first thing is to create a communications plan. And of course, as data people and analytics people, this is not our forte, right? But we've created a template with multiple tabs. You can't see the tabs on that little image there. This is one of the tabs here. This is about how to like reach out to your executives. And you can download this from our website, or we'll email it to you if you want. And the plan is basically a communications plan. It's how you target key stakeholders, define them as by their personas and the best way to engage them, understand who influences them, et cetera, et cetera. At least that's the initial phase of this plan here. So we want to basically, socialize this plan with the key executives. And then once we gain approval from the powers that be, we flesh out to the rest of the plan and target individuals, groups with specific types of messages that are tailored to those individuals and groups through various channels that they're most likely to want to be communicated and contacted by, and have a certain amount of timing. How frequently should we send messages? For how long, right? Now, as I said, this is not something that we in the data space do. It's not intuitive to us. So you may want to recruit or hire communications professionals to help you. Every company has a marketing team, maybe a PR team, and those people might be able to lend advice, if not actual time in actually executing these plans, right? If not, you might want to hire a freelance writer or a freelance videographer, someone who can create posters or merchandise to help, spread the message, right? And the second part is to get executive buy-in. I think we all have done this if we're in a leadership position. Socialize the proposal to the key stakeholders. Find one stakeholder that's willing to be a champion. Make sure that person is respected, influential, and will stick around for the duration of the project. I've seen more cases where the sponsor leaves halfway through and the whole project kind of implodes. Don't want that. It's also really important to identify who are the skeptics who might try to sabotage this project or initiative, either vocally and directly, or indirectly by just sitting on it and not doing anything. So make sure you get with them, listen to their concerns, try to pitch this in terms of what they need, right? So sometimes that's called moral reframing. Understand their perspective and where they're coming from and address your points to those. And then make adjustments if needed to get them on board. Also identify supporters of this plan who might be able to influence those skeptics. So maybe you're not the right person to talk to them. Maybe there's someone else who's better suited to that. All right, so once a change has been approved by the executives, you need to roll it out. This is where things get interesting. First, we're always tempted, and I've said this as a rule in the past, and I'm now absolving myself of this. Don't start with an executive pronouncement. I would love to hear your thoughts out in the audience here. Because as soon as executives come and say, hey, this is what we're going to do, that's when the eyes start rolling, right? And you have not spent the time to build a groundswell of support for it, right? So this is when the cynicism creeps in. So I think it's better to start small, and research proves this, and I'll talk about that research in a second. So one option, probably the best option, is to look around your organization and find 2 or 3 cohesive and well-connected teams. By cohesive, I mean the people on those teams work well together, they communicate, they trust each other, they're well connected to each other, they talk a lot, and they're well connected to other teams. And then find 2 or 3 well-connected individuals on those teams and approach them and see if they'll be kind of the guinea pig to get the training first, or whatever it is you need to do to put forth this change. And then once they've gone through that, encourage them, if the results are positive, to share their experiences and the outcomes. Another way to do this, and it's not mutually exclusive, is to create a cross-functional group, and you may actually already have one, like your Data Governance Council, you may have a BI Council. And this is a cross-functional group of influential and highly connected individuals by the fact that they're actually on this committee. And communicate the change to them and have them communicate that change to their team, especially if they're on board with it. And then encourage them to share kind of the results of what that communication has generated, right? And then once you have some positive experiences from those small groups, make sure you're paying attention to what they've done, capture their conversations and their communications, and then apply your plan to amplify what they've done to the rest of the organization to start to make this thing go viral. So there is some research behind this, and it comes from a great book that I read a year or two ago called Change by a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School of Business, Damon Centola, How to Make Big Things Happen. And he talked about these different types of social networks. And you can see this is a picture from his book. You know, there's a strong social network pictured on the left, which is lots of people who communicate frequently and who have high degree of trust with each other. So it's a tight network. And then you have this weak social network on the right, and this is like a social media influencer. So it's one person who can touch a lot of people very quickly. And you know, his point was that we all think that the network on the right is the best way to get an idea out there. And he said, well, yes, it is. It's the best way to get a new idea out there, but it's not the best way to persuade people to change their ways of doing things. He said the social network on the left with these tight linkages is the best way to get people to change, because once 1 or 2 people start to change, they influence other people in this network, and it just starts to flip after a while. He said, if you can get 25% of the people in a strong social network to adopt a new behavior, the rest will come along almost instantaneously. So there is a tipping point in change management, right? And our goal with the head to heart to herd and these tactics is really to reach that tipping point. Then he said, once you've reached the tipping point with one strong, small social group, make sure that group is connected to other strong social networks, right? Because if they are, that change will leap from one to the other. And very quickly, the entire organization, once you reach the 25% adoption rate across your organization, the whole thing will flip, right? And this is actually how Twitter evolved. Adoption started out in Boston and San Francisco around the universities, you know, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and those people were very well connected inside those universities and between those universities. And that's where Twitter's initial adoption happened. And then it gained momentum from there and flipped across other social networks. And the last tactic is, as I mentioned earlier, is to be ready to scale. So if you're successful in applying the head to heart to herd and some of these tactics, and you reach that tipping point, things are going to explode. So you have to be ready, because otherwise all the good work you've done, it will start to flag and energy will go out of the movement, right? So you need to be ready to scale your training, your licenses, your support, and the governance of the output of this change, right? So those are things that you need to be ready. Probably need to have new data owners and stewards ready, et cetera, on the governance side. So that is the last tactic. I will stop there. Jay, any questions or comments?
Yeah, we have a couple of good comments here from one from Greg, who says it's regarding the communication plan. It's really important to be consistent, keep technical jargon out of it, and focus on the business value. And I would really, I would emphasize that one a lot, to be very much keyed on the business value of the outcomes. And also to focus on why, why are you making this change? And if you are organizing your communication plan around those principles of appealing to the head, the heart, and the herd, you can imagine how you would include evidence, calls to action, being part of the group that's changing something within the organization or in an industry, the things that you cited earlier, what things that are bigger than an individual's own concerns. Right. Those are really important. And I would emphasize from my experience the importance of starting with a group that is open to the change, or perhaps even already doing it. Yeah. Right? Because you can imagine when we're talking about the communication plan in a very large organization, trying to come up with all the different messages that speak to all the different constituencies within a big organization and in one go is virtually impossible, right? Yeah. So you start with someplace where you can, essentially, to use a phrase we've heard before, win the hearts and minds of people. If they're already doing it, you can start there. And then you have, rather than the executive pronouncement, you have, hey, look at this. Here's evidence that we can do this change, right? We're already doing it. Yeah, that's a principle from another book I would recommend around organizational change called Switch. And managing the journey, shortening the journey is one of their principles, which is finding, team or a group where the change is already happening and it's already working, and then using that as a way of both in terms of evidence and also appealing to the head and the herd, to say, yeah, we can do this, and here's an example of what it looks like. Here's what we can actually do. And I think that's really critical. That book Switch by two brothers whose names I forgot, I read that a long time ago, and I think actually this framework, head, heart, and herd, largely came from them. So yeah. I highly recommend that book as well. Yep. Yeah, somebody just put the link to the book. Yeah. The Heath brothers. Heath brothers, right. Yeah. I found that book to be, of all the business books that I've read, that was both, it spoke to me both to my head and to my heart, right? There you go. It was really influential for me. I found it very practical. And now the fact that we're all recommending it's the appealing to the herd too. So there you go. Yes. Everybody's going to go read that. Yeah. All right. Should we move on? Any more? Okay. Hang on. There's one other comment here. Yeah. So a comment from Jim said, we were able to apply trending with adoption as we scaled the solution, and then asked why the solution wasn't utilized as much as possible and made adjustments. So it's, I think that's another thing when you talk about how are you already doing this? If you're practicing, agile development, if you're using an agile development practice where you're engaging with stakeholders on a regular basis, you're kind of already doing some of these things, or you have the opportunity to, certainly in hearing reactions to, the latest sprint's output, right? And getting feedback from your stakeholders and noticing their emotional reaction in addition to their what kinds of concerns they may be expressing about about the steps they have to take, but also how are they reacting to it emotionally? Are they excited? Are they seeming to be oppressed by what they're going to have to do? Yeah, that's all good information to feed back into how you're developing things on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and you kind of bring up a point that's important, that the change management never stops,
Yeah.
right? That even once you've deployed it and groups are starting to use it, you still have to apply these principles. Like that VP of BI from the chemical company I mentioned, every day he would look at the adoption rate of the dashboards. And if he noticed that there was a downtick in one of the departments, he was on the phone right away, or he was visiting that department to find out, hey, what's going on? Is there an issue? Do you guys
Yeah.
not like the interface anymore? Or did something change? So, if you're not on top of this and you don't have your finger on the pulse of your customers' experiences with the tools and solutions you've deployed, the adoption rate may start to drop. Let's go on to the last section, which is the use case or case study, and then we'll close out. So this came from the book I wrote a while ago, Secrets of Analytical Leaders, Insights from Information Insiders, where I had the luxury of interviewing in depth about 15 successful data and analytics leaders. And Dan Engel from Kelley Blue Book was one of them. I think he was VP of Technology and Insights there. I think he's now running the place or something close to it. So this was like in the early 2000s. And at this time, if you remember Kelley Blue Book, it published a paper-based book or bulletin every month of used car values around the country. And at that time, the executives started to realize, hey, things are changing. I think we're going to have to start to digitize stuff. We're going to have to start to use statistical analysis to create these values. So they did something pretty radical when Dan was there, and he was kind of running the data warehousing side of the business. Is they brought in a team of data scientists. They call them statisticians. Then we call them data scientists. Now I guess we call them AI developers. But people with that statistical knowledge to help deliver these values, right? So before this time, before they brought in these statisticians, they had these kind of old guard valuation analysts. These are mostly guys who've been in the industry for a long time. They had a lot of connections in the industry. And typically every month they would just call up their connections and kind of use their experience and gut intuition to come up with these values, which they then published in the Kelley Blue Book. Now, you can imagine the consternation, the fear that they might have had when they learned that they were going to bring in these statisticians to develop values. They probably thought they were going to lose their jobs, their status, their reputation, all this stuff that we talked about, right? But Kelley Blue Book did this the right way. The first thing they did is they educated the analysts about how statisticians generate models and generate insights and results. And they also educated the scientists about how the analysts do their work and how the industry works. And in fact, they ended up educating each other. So that's appealing to the head, right? Next thing they did is applied new incentives. This is appealing to the heart. So now you will be incented by the accuracy of your valuation, which they would determine statistically after the fact, right? And both the analyst and the statisticians would be incented the same way. So they were aligned from an incentive perspective. And that was done to foster teamwork, and that they wanted these people to work together. They also located them together. So this is kind of like appealing to the herd in some ways, is that, okay, you guys are now one team, you're a partner, you're supposed to work together. And the big thing they did, which is this last bullet, is there's one thing they didn't change. They did not take responsibility for those values from the analysts. They were still responsible for publishing the numbers every month, right? That was their responsibility, and they were going to be held accountable along with the statisticians for the accuracy of those values. So that was one thing that they didn't change. So they didn't lose their status. They didn't, in the company, and they didn't lose their accountability and responsibility, which they wanted to keep. And this proved to be really effective because they ended up very quickly realizing, the analysts did, that, wow, these statisticians can actually help me, make better, more accurate predictions. In the end, it was their prediction, right? So that was effective. And the results from the company perspective were even more impressive. They went from publishing values monthly to publishing them weekly. So this is the case of where AI can really help the same group of people do a hell of a lot more, right? Human augmentation through AI. They published to more regions. They went from 5 regions where they published valuations to 52. And they published values on an order of magnitude more vehicles and vehicle models, hundreds to tens of thousands. So this is a huge win for the organization, a huge win for the valuation analysts. They were very proud that they could now do a hell of a lot more with, just the help of these data scientists. So this I thought was a beautiful example of how to apply the head, the heart, and the herd to take what could have been a very volatile and fractious change and make it work significantly well. So, with that, this is a quote from Dan. I'll just read this. This joint accountability fosters a close relationship and two-way exchange of information. For instance, when analysts see something in output that seems off, they talk to the statistician to see if a weighting or variable needs tweaking. Here, analysts teach the statisticians about the auto industry so that they can make more accurate models. But statisticians also teach the analysts about the nuances of predictive modeling. The partnership makes the models more effective. So continuing education, fostering partnership through shared incentives, working together in the same space, physical space, enabled to make this huge cultural change. So in summary, managing change is critical to your success. Don't wait till the very end when you're about to deploy something. Start early, create your communication plan, know who you're targeting, apply the head, the heart, and the herd principles to communicating with those folks. And when you want to really gain adoption, start small with small cohesive groups that are connected to other small cohesive groups, ideally. And if needed to, get the word out in ways that really resonate with people, either verbally or in the written word, hire or recruit communications experts at your own company or on freelance job boards. So with that, we'll go back to see if there are any more comments or questions. Starting with you, Jay.
Yeah. So one thing that strikes me about that case study is by fostering the partnership between the analysts and the scientists, what they were doing, it seems to me, and tell me if you agree, is creating that tight social network, right? They were fostering a situation in which you can where there was more point-to-point communication rather than the weak the weak social network which relies on like a hub and spoke type of distribution of information. And I think that's a great example of the benefit of having a strong social network to work with. And that reinforces the point about starting small in areas where either there already exists that kind of network between a couple of teams that work well together, or even creating a cross-functional team where you can foster that, which is what Kelly did.
Yeah. Actually, you could say that the analyst group was one strong social network, and the scientists were another strong social network that were tightly connected through these shared incentives and the way they were physically located. Yeah, that's great. Okay, any other comments from our audience?
Yeah, there's one that just came in. I tried asking my hierarchy to implement an LLM for processing guidelines on the basis of a knowledge bank that we had. Also propose Six Sigma methodology while implementing AI tools for BI, but was unable to implement due to many reasons. Yeah, I mean, those sound like big changes that would trigger a lot of fear and uncertainty. If so, maybe some of what we talked about today could help help you reapproach these proposals that you're making.
Yeah, well, ironically, I actually gave a podcast yesterday on Gen AI and
Yeah.
how to generate adoption there. And the problem with Gen AI or LLMs is that there's just a huge amount of risk involved, from
Yeah.
hallucinations to data leakage, to replicability. It goes on and on. I think I listed 15 different risks, right? So
Yeah.
if you're implementing an LLM for external consumption, like to do customer service, which seems like a logical one for customers, it's really hard to do that without creating chaos, right? Because the LLMs, they can give different answers to the same question, and you don't want that in your customer service group, right?
Right.
And you certainly don't want them to give wrong answers. So that's a tough one. I think many companies haven't really deployed these things yet. Even internally, it's hard to deploy because there's really no access controls on these things.
Yeah.
They're starting to be, but even then, there's no way you can control the output of an LLM. There's workarounds for it. We can apply filters. We can use RAG. I'm not sure anything's fail safe at this point, but
Yeah.
anyway. So
So there's a follow-up question here from that commenter, Chandrakant, asking, how would we apply these principles to an integrated approach of Six Sigma and AI? And I think, the first thing is go back to a comment that somebody made earlier, which is what's the business value of doing this, right? What's the why behind making this proposal? And then secondly, I would say, is there anybody within the organization, any teams within the organization that are already doing what you think should be done, or doing parts of it, right? Where you can say, yeah, we can do this. Here's an example, and here are the example benefits of doing so.
Yeah. Well, the benefits is that actually in that webinar I gave yesterday, there was a use case of a organization that built an agentic model, and it was using it for this very purpose for customer service. And the model is supposed to check different, knowledge bases and give an answer within seconds. Obviously, that works, and it seemed to work for this one organization after a lot of work. It saves a lot of money, right? You don't have humans in the middle of that.
Mm-hmm.
But for Gen AI, I think the big thing is fear. We talked about fear being a real impediment to change, right? So the fear in Gen AI is all those risks that I talked about, those 15 risks. So you're going to have to address those one after another to the satisfaction of your powers that be before they're going to let this thing roll out.
Yeah. Isn't there anything else in the chat? I guess, one thing I would offer is a metaphor that works for me is when you think about how to roll out change and focusing on where you can win hearts and minds, as you imagine, those areas where you can start as a spot on an ink blot on a tablecloth, right? And you drop the ink on the tablecloth and then it spreads out. And then you go somewhere else
ink blot
and you find another
metaphor,
place.
Yeah.
You find another place where you can, have success, and you drop your ink blot there and it spreads out. And pretty soon you may not have the whole organization covered, but you got a lot of it covered. And those ink blots start to overlap. And that's where the tipping point it can be achieved. So,
there you
focusing
go.
on where
you
you
told
can.
me you were going to introduce that ink blot metaphor into this conversation. So you got it in the last minute. Good for you.
Right.
Well,
Which, by
I
the way,
think
comes from the military's counterinsurgency approach, right? That's where that metaphor comes from.
Right. Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I think we've run out of time. Thank you all
Yep.
in the audience for your patience. We hope this was of some value. If you have follow-up questions, we'd love to talk to you.
Yep.
So contact us at info@eckerson.com or wayne@eckerson.com or jay@eckerson.com. And Jay, I'm going to give you the last word. You got 10 seconds here.
Yeah, it's all, everything we do in the technology realm is about change ultimately. no matter what the technology is, it has to be used and consumed by humans, and that requires change management.
Well said. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.